Dear friends, welcome to a new episode of the Christ at the Checkpoint podcast. And in this episode, we will be introducing a new genre in which I will be inviting Palestinian Christian friends, and we will be discussing recent articles that address how evangelicals in general continue to address the unfolding genocide in Gaza. We aim to have a conversation, but more than that, expose the complicity of many evangelicals without undermining the important role many also evangelicals are praying to end this genocide. With me are Tony Deik and Danielle, or should I say Dr. Tony and Dr. Danielle. Both of them recently obtained their PhDs. So congratulations to the two of you. And in today's episode, we will be discussing a recent article that appeared on the Gospel Coalition website. Now, why this article? First of all, it's the Gospel Coalition, a mainstream evangelical line that is not necessarily dispensationalist or fundamentalist or obsessed with end-time theology. And I think it's important because many times we equate Christian Zionism with end-time theology obsession, or with fanatics, political activists like John Hagee or Mike Huckabee. However, today we will be looking at the Gospel Coalition, known for its reformed approach. And I'm pretty sure that most of those involved or associated with the Gospel Coalition, most probably even the author himself of this article we will be discussing, will distance themselves from the traditional or classical dispensational approach that focuses on the end times. And so this is why this article is important, because as I said, it underlines this reality that it's not just a certain type of evangelicals. At the same time, this article is also important because I feel it is representative of many evangelical approaches or arguments that I've heard over the years vis-a-vis Palestine, and definitely regarding what's happening in Gaza. We could have selected other articles that adopt a similar approach to what's happening in our land, an approach that gives the impression that they are neutral, looks equally at both sides, there are victims on both sides, we need to pray for peace, and so on, yet goes on and, as we will see, and argue, repeats the Zionist arguments and the Zionist discourse. So the article we will be discussing is called Beyond Slogans, a Christian Perspective on Gaza. It appeared on August 2nd, 2025 on the Gospel Coalition website. The author's name is Joshua Youssef. Joshua himself leads a ministry called Help the Persecuted. Of course, we commend all ministries that seek to support, empower, and sustain persecuted Christians around the world. We have very close ties throughout the years at Bethlehem Bible College and Christ at the Checkpoint with Open Doors. At the same time, we always emphasize we must care for all victims of injustice, all persecuted minorities, or for political purposes all over the world. So please know, I hope no one understands from this discussion that this is against Joshua himself or the ministry itself, but it's against the arguments that he presents, because we feel they are very, in my opinion, very dangerous, and I'm sure Tony and Danielle will help us show this. And as I said, the fact that this is the Gospel Coalition emphasizes why we need to discuss this. And by the way, this is not the first time the Gospel Coalition publishes on the situation in Palestine, certainly, but also on Gaza. And I think there was an article at the beginning of the war. Maybe Tony, you can tell us about it, because you actually reached out to the author, in which it equates Palestinians maybe with the Amalekites. Can you tell us more before we go into this article?
Yes, well, a friend of mine reached to the author of that article linking Hamas with the Amalekites. And what shocked us is that this friend told the author that this is a trope, a well-known trope that is used in Israel to legitimize the killing of Palestinians, the massacring of Palestinians, and all of that. And the shocking thing is that the author responded back and said, yes, I know about this misuse, but I insist to keep the article because according to him, the Bible commands Christians to destroy completely people like Hamas. So according to the author in private conversation, we should pray towards that. So yes, unfortunately, this is not the first article by the Gospel Coalition giving such opinions about Palestine. And the sad bit is that the Gospel Coalition has big outreach, both to the Arab world and to Latin America, where I currently live in Bolivia. And on their Spanish website, La Coalición por el Evangelio, the article was almost immediately published on the 5th of August to the Latin American Christians, to Latin American audience. And they are putting, as I understand, lots of resources towards that. So we are dealing with, an American ministry that is trying to influence, and even some people at the Gospel Coalition said clearly that they consider that Latin America is not evangelized yet. The gospel, the real reformed gospel, didn't reach there. So they are intentionally and perhaps aggressively working towards re-evangelizing Latin America with their theology.
And this kind of article presents itself, as we will see, as neutral, as trying to look at both sides. And this is why we want to emphasize this kind of approach. So after an introduction, again, the title is Beyond Slogans, a Christian Perspective on Gaza. After a short introduction that mentions the author's visit to the Palestinian territories in the early 2000s, his delusion about who needs food and who's blocking it. I don't know what's the delusion about, honestly. Who needs food and who's blocking it? Who's blocking the food? Come on. And in the midst of his delusion, he thinks about the Christians. And so then he delves into the topic and begins by talking about what he calls a triangle of suffering that Palestinians face, I think. Triangle of suffering. And that triangle is first the Fatah leadership, second Israel, and third Hamas. I think it's worth reading so that we don't just reiterate what he's saying, but actually listen to his words. He says, at one corner of Palestinian suffering stands the corrupt Fatah leadership, which controls the West Bank and many of the Palestinian refugee camps. Fatah is formally known as the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, and its leadership has often prioritized personal gain over the welfare of its people. Of course, no other leaders do this, only Fatah. Americans care about the people, Israelis, and so on. At another corner looms Israeli control with its checkpoints and restrictions. That's our problem, checkpoints. Attacks by extremist Israeli settlers on Palestinian communities recently included a village with many Palestinian Christians. U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee called it an act of terror and a crime. And it's worth mentioning that 2 weeks after he said that, he visited the settlers who are committing these attacks. And then the third corner presents perhaps the gravest threat, the rising influence of Hamas and other religious extremist groups that are openly hostile to Christians. The hostility of these groups is anything but theoretical. In 2007, Hamas militants murdered Rami Ayad, a Palestinian Bible Society worker in Gaza, simply because of his Christian witness. Such acts of persecutions have created a climate of fear that drives many Palestinian Christians to flee their ancestral homeland, contributing to the steady exodus of Christianity from the region where our faith was born. And to conclude this section, he says, compounding this tragedy is the fact that even neighboring Arab states often view Palestinians with disdain. Palestinians have become a people without a home. And for our Christian brothers and sisters, this exiled existence carries particular pain as they watch their communities dwindle and their ancient churches empty or come under direct attack. My goodness, I don't know where to start.
I will just make a few comments here, Munther. I don't want to go after the author himself, but he's part of this narrative that exists in many evangelical circles, where the Christian is the perpetual victim of Muslim violence. So in this triangle, there are three kinds of suffering, and two out of the three, are from Muslims against the Christians, the poor silent Christian victims. This is a narrative of this kind of the silent victim who's stuck and is harmed by Muslims. It's a very troubling discourse, and we're going to see some of that kind of anti-Muslim narrative that comes through this article. But that's part of that business model, like, just to be blunt about it, where many Christians in the West are more comfortable with thinking that Christians in Palestine or Nigeria, whatever, suffer from Muslims, rather than to be more nuanced and more critical about actually what is happening on the ground. And that shows a lot in what he's saying. So there's nothing about what's happening in Gaza, right? There's no mention of the famine or the catastrophes or the destruction and the desolation of Gaza. Poor Christians in the West Bank who suffer from checkpoints, or or one Christian. We can talk about the death of Brahmi, who was killed 15 years ago, and now we're going to talk about him again. Never mind all the Christians who were killed by Israel in the last.
And there is a questioning of the famine as well. That's the shocking bit.
Right? Yeah. So you can tell there's a very automatic dehumanization of Muslims who are suffering, and you put the Christians on a pedestal, but the complete disregard for the genuine suffering of many millions of Muslims right now in Gaza.
Absolutely, and as horrific as the murder of Rami Ayyad was, and I remember how shocked we were when that happened. If we look at the numbers, how many Christians were killed by Israel in comparison to the Christians killed by Hamas? But what's really fascinating is that, again, this is a typical evangelical narrative that looks at the reality as a conflict between two sides. And in this so-called triangle, as you said, Danny, two sides are that cause suffering is Palestinian, and what Israel is doing is merely control, checkpoints, restrictions, and extremist attacks. Nothing about the brutal reality under military occupation, nothing about apartheid, nothing about the forced displacement of families, including Christian families, if he genuinely cares about Christian families. And again, it's as if there are equal sides fighting, and we are victims of these equal sides that are fighting. But I couldn't help but, observe, and maybe I'll ask Tony about this, a sense of dehumanization of the Palestinians. The narrative begins with our corruption and concludes with our extremism, even alluding, maybe not intentionally, I don't know if that was his intention or not, that Arab countries don't like us, Is it because we're troublemakers? Is it because we are not likable as Palestinians? So notice in this paragraph of triangle suffering, there's so much negative connotations of Palestinians. Everything is our fault.
To be honest, just if we step back a little bit and just question where he knows all of this, right? This is also problematic. So he says that he had a trip to Palestine in the early 2000s. So this is the first source of his information. And then the second source is that the news that he watches. That's the second paragraph of the introduction. As I watch news, I wonder what to believe about who needs food and who's blocking it. And I keep thinking about those Christians. So the article doesn't demonstrate someone who is serious about truth, about knowing what is happening. So of course, this triangle of suffering I mean, it is far removed from reality. I mean, he's describing a very different context than the context that I lived in and I grew up in. I mean, he's mentioning the corruption of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is the government. Particularly Fatah, he's mentioning they're in power in the West Bank, meaning they won elections at some point, and they run the government agencies in the West Bank. I worked for a couple of years with the Palestinian Ministry of Telecommunications, and the project I worked on was not corrupt. We did good things. We wanted to facilitate e-services for Palestinian citizens. We worked on an e-government project. So like this very simplistic generalization, like this article does not demonstrate, does not show a passion or a desire to know the truth or to understand the reality of what is happening. If he doesn't know who is blocking the food to Gaza, and he doesn't know who needs food, who needs food, for example, the Israeli soldiers need food, who needs food? I mean, the simple, very simple, straightforward facts. And this is also ABC Christianity. As Christians, we need to be serious about the truth. So this is not someone who's serious about the truth. It is evident that he hasn't spoken with Palestinians recently. He is not serious about looking at all of these human rights, very thick human rights reports. And he just shares an opinion, an uninformed opinion. Now, we are not saying that the government in the West Bank isn't corrupt, by the way. I mean, we have issues with the government. I mean, for example, during the genocide in Gaza, the government in Palestine was doing security coordination with the Israeli occupation. So certainly there is corruption. And I think the best way to understand, in my opinion, this is my opinion, the best way to understand the Palestinian government is by making an analogy with first century Palestine. They are like Herod in first century Palestine. So yes, surely there is corruption, but we can't generalize. Right. I myself worked with the Palestinian government, and we did good things.
I think this trope, Tony, is really like unfairly given to the Palestinians. It's like a talking point that is always brought up without kind of the conversation of, well, who keeps the Palestinian government in power? Who pays them to remain in power? Right? Like, how are they actually corrupt? You know, like I heard in the news that I don't know, the government in Mars, the Martian government is corrupt. Like, so what? Like, what are you trying to say? Like, so what if the Israeli government is corrupt or the American government is corrupt? But using that as an excuse to muddy the water and excuse what's happening against the Palestinians is very obvious. But there's something unique in the Palestinian government. The Palestinians are inherently corrupt and bad. And there's something that, happening to the Palestinians because of the government. It's not an honest take. But also just a quick point here, we have to address this, like what are his sources? Because he's someone who works with the persecuted church, and you just gotta wonder, like, why aren't you quoting what Palestinian Christians are saying? Why aren't you referring to, us who have been speaking about this issue? What are we actually saying about our suffering, right? So he's not really speaking with us. He's not trying to advocate for what Palestinian Christians are saying. He's basically appealing to lazy tropes used in the U.S. to justify and to whitewash the occupation and the oppression of the Palestinians. It's a very problematic take, and we have to be critical about this.
And just to be fair to the author, he claims, and we will read it, that he talks to or he documents bias against Christian converts from Islam in the UN's hiring practices. So it seems he is also basing a lot of his analysis to reports he gets from, as he claims, from Christian converts from Islam in this regions. We can verify that. But, to me, when I read this this concept of corruption of Palestinians, as if the Israelis are not corrupt, as if the Americans are not corrupt, as if,
right, yeah.
Corruption is uniquely a Palestinian feature, or as if it's really this severe that is making life dysfunctional. And, Tony mentioned one element about the fact that the Palestinian Authority finds itself in this very difficult position after Oslo, having to provide services to maintain the occupation. But at the same time, whether in the health sector or in the educational sector, Palestinians are doing their best, working with honesty to build their society. And to begin the article by referring to Palestinian corruption gives this impression, as you said, that here everything is dysfunctional. People are using everything for their personal gain against the welfare of its people. It's not just a mischaracterization, but also, as I said, it feeds into this dehumanizing narrative. And the other thing that was, that I can't just, is how much he undermines the brutality of the occupation. What you said, Tony, is important. The reports. If he's from distance, at least why don't you read the Human Rights Watch's detailed reports? Actually, if you don't believe them, to you in the Gospel Coalition, they are liberal and they are secular and so on. Read the Israeli rabbis for human rights. Read B'Tselem. It's not as if you have to be genius.
When it comes to, for example, Human Rights Watch and others, Christians quote them freely when they speak about human rights abuses in China, in Vietnam, and so forth. But they completely...
The persecution of Christians.
Yeah, but they completely ignore them when it comes to Palestine.
And they're like Munther, just to back up, when talk about Christians suffering throughout, in Palestine, maybe you should have said something about the Nakba and the destruction of Christian communities in Nakba. Maybe the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, a Christian journalist, an American Palestinian journalist. Maybe the Qasiyya family in Bethlehem, that they had their land taken from them.
The loss of family as well.
Yeah, my family, we lost dunams, acres of land to a settlement next to Beit Sahur. How about you actually give us some real examples of literal persecution of Christians by the Israeli state? But no, all of that is invisible. I don't know if it's intentional. I don't know if he doesn't know. But also, if you don't know, why are you speaking about this issue? If you don't actually understand
Exactly.
And the idea of the exodus, the steady exodus of Christianity from the region, we're talking about Palestine. I don't want to talk about the region. Of course, every context is different. But when he refers to the exodus of Christianity from the region in the same sentence or in reference to the killing of Rami Ayyad, again, is it deliberately ignoring the fact that more than 50,000 Palestinian Christians were forcibly removed, displaced from their country in the Nakba? And again, this is a very common narrative. Christians are leaving Bethlehem because Muslims are pushing them. And then they quote the numbers. We had a whole episode about this at the Christ at the Checkpoint podcast. And they quote the numbers, ignoring the occupation, ignoring the brutality of the occupation. But again, it feeds this narrative that Muslims are persecuting Christians, and that's why Christians are fleeing. And again, this is not to deny what happened to Rami or the fact that there are some extremists in all sides. And just before we move on with the article, and just to, by the way, whenever people mention the fact that Christians are forced to leave and so on in Palestine, I always say there is a very simple solution to the issue of Christian exodus from Palestine, or the dwindling number. And I know, give Palestinians the right of return. Do you know how many Palestinian Christians I know who will immediately leave everything and come back to their homes? Do you know how many I know? Just give us the right of return.
Sorry, Munther, just to claim, just for the audience who don't know what the right of return is, this is the Palestinians who were kicked out in 1948. There's an enshrined law, the law of return, that says if you were evicted out of your land, you have the right to go back to your land. 77 years later, Christians and Muslim Palestinians are not allowed to go back to their land. So the reason for their exodus is not persecution; it's because of what happened in 1948. Sorry. Go ahead.
And 50% of the Palestinian population is in the diaspora, is in exile. We're talking about 6 million Palestinians registered in the United Nations as refugees in 58 refugee camps. And the numbers are staggering. People, half of the population, half of the Palestinians, are outside. With 14 million, 7 in the diaspora and 7 in the land. So we're not talking about the small.
My cousins wish they could even just visit.
Right. Yeah.
They can't even visit the land. So that's a triangle of suffering.
Yeah, we have this kind of trope of, well, Hamas is guilty of everything. But what he does, though, which is super problematic, is to quickly, in the same paragraph, connect that with the exodus of Palestinian Christians. Knowing, though, he doesn't know, obviously, that Christian Palestinians have been telling the world the reason that they have been leaving Palestine. We have numerous studies by Palestinian Christians. I think I remember Pastor Mitri Rahib did a survey on this. And the majority of Christian Palestinians who left Palestine are saying the main reason for their leaving the Palestine is because of the restrictions of movement on the economy and the political reality. Not because of of persecution.
4%, I think 4% said, if I'm not mistaken, in that survey of religious.
Yeah, very small minority. But obviously, this narrative, Pastor Munther, is inconvenient for those who traffic in this persecution of Christians by Muslims. Because if we were honest, we're saying that the reason for the persecution of Christians is actually what Israel is doing. And that does not jive well with that narrative that they try to sell.
So, if we move on, first, there's this triangle of suffering. There is equal sides of the equation. Israeli have some restrictions against us, but our problem is ourselves as Palestinians. And then the second section, he calls it no tidy narratives. And this is typical, it's complicated. That's what we always hear. It's complicated. Avoid simplistic solutions. So this is what the author says. He says, as followers of Christ, we must resist the temptation to reduce complex human suffering to simple narratives that fit our political preferences. So he tells us, don't reduce complex human suffering to simple narratives, and then it's a simple narrative, October 7th is bad.
Right.
What happened on October 7th, 2023, because, as Rifat Qassis always says, he's a Palestinian Christian activist, and in the beginning, there was October 7th. That's how, in the minds of many Western Christians. Let's read. What happened on October 7th, 2023 was a wicked act of hatred from Islamic extremists. The attacks on Israeli civilians were horrific acts of terrorism that justified retaliation. Fair-minded observers cannot conclude that Israel's military and political response was unwarranted. Some, however, will only question whether that response was proportionate and strategic, with a viable place for long-term governance and stability. Just to clarify for our audience, that response that he's talking about is the genocide that leveled maybe 100,000 people. He calls it response. He continues, the mainstream news narrative and recent recognition of Palestinian statehood seems predetermined. Israel is the aggressor and Palestinians are the victims. This is the guy who told us to avoid simple narratives that fit our political preferences. Western journalists have extensively covered attempted food airdrops to starving Gazans. Articles abound criticizing the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and its evangelical leadership, questioning their capacity for impartiality. Yet these same publications remain conspicuously silent about the UN's hiring practices and documented bias against Christians converts from Islam, something my organization witnesses regularly. Of course, because we Christians must be always at the center of the world.
The thing is, he never like hyperlinks that last bit about the UN and practices. This is what your organization does, like show us the reports. I don't know what he's talking about. But to also conflate those two different things about, again, like this is the same trope of the perpetual Christian victim, right? Okay, well, let's say that's actually true. Show us, but also how is that related to the famine and the destruction in Gaza? So this is just it's called like a red herring. You just want to muddy the water by inserting some information that have nothing to do with what's happening in Gaza, and you use the poor Christian victim as a talking point. It's like a very disingenuous. I need to be kind with my language, but it's a very like dishonest. I'm sorry for this language. Dishonest way to deal with what's happening in Gaza. This is not a real and a serious and also a charitable way to think about Gaza. It's muddying the water to make a political point.
100%.
And to be clear, we're talking about what numerous reports from human rights organizations to legal entities, to UN reports, including, by the way, several Holocaust and genocide scholars, including several Jewish Holocaust and genocide scholars, Israeli Jewish Holocaust and genocide scholars, who said this is targeted killing, this is genocide, this is not acts of self-defense, and so on. Did he read the reports? Did he take them seriously? I mean, again, and what shocks me is that he criticizes the media that is predominantly biased for years towards Israel. And the only, he tells us not to do simple narratives, then goes on and condemns with the strongest language possible, as did many Christians, we know, many church statements and so on, the wicked act of hatred from Islamic extremists. These are horrific acts of terrorism that justified retaliation. We'll talk about justified retaliation later.
Like, he didn't even care to mention what happened between January, the 1st of January and October 6th of 2023. And as we highlighted in our call for repentance, 300 Palestinians. Yeah, even the very immediate context, just what happened in the 9 months before October 7, how 300 Palestinians, including 38 children, were killed in the West Bank that year before October 7.
Where there's no Hamas.
Where
Yes. So the context is completely missing. We know this. But what I want to highlight, and this is common in all, even most evangelical responses and Christian responses, to be honest. Everything began on October 7th. Everyone avoids the context. And again, we're not justifying, we're not supporting, we're not condoning what happened on October 7th. We cannot, justify or support killing of children and so on and civilians. But what shocks me, again, we shouldn't be shocked anymore. Here is the typical, what he wants to convince, and many others as fair-minded, is October 7th was bad, yet the response was maybe we can question, if it was perfect, if it was done in a good way, maybe, they could have been less and so on. And again, there is no condemnation. So what he called wicked act of hatred only applies to the Palestinians, but not to the Israelis who filmed themselves demolishing homes, who, my goodness, 20,000 children have been killed. Children are being killed from starvation. He can't even condemn that. Only blames Palestinians for everything. And just he says, we have the right to question, was it warranted or so on, whether was it proportionate.
He's saying
some will question. Yes.
Some will question.
Like 2 people, like 2-3 people maybe.
Some people will question. I mean, he himself is not questioning. And also, to be honest, he uses stronger language. Like, he uses the word justice. Maybe I shouldn't jump, but in the 3rd section, call for Christian consistency.
Justified retaliation.
Justified, and also in the in the penultimate paragraph. It means supporting Israel's right to defend itself while questioning whether all tactics serve the cause of justice. So there is a presupposition here that what Israel does is serving the cause of justice, but perhaps some of its tactics like genocide, etc., maybe, we're not sure if it serves the cause of justice, but the presupposition is that Israel is serving the cause of justice.
You know that if this article was published in November of 2023, like I would be okay with it. I obviously would be disappointed, but like 22 months later, like seriously, this is that kind of discourse that you as an author, especially someone who's from, probably didn't have to say this, like someone from the Middle East, like you should, surely you know the language, you know the culture, but 22 months later, this is the kind of discourse you have without, like it shows that Christian, and this also is reflective of a lot of experiences that we have as Palestinian Christians, of how like tone deaf so many Christians can be and so apathetic to like real things. Like when, like surely the author knows about the Israeli Holocaust and genocide scholars who call this a genocide. Surely they have heard of Amnesty International, the most important human rights organization in the world. Surely have heard of B'Tselem and their reporting. But it's so fascinating to me, like how more like tone deaf and ignorant can we be? It's shocking to me.
I'm sorry, Danny, but also the article is not showing any desire to know the truth. So I'm not sure if they know about all of these reports. Like there is not care. It seems like the article doesn't demonstrate that. Like that there is care to mention these reports, to check them out. It is, to be honest, it is a shocking article. It is, the least.
And of course. The more recent report is the one by Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem itself, which called it our genocide.
Exactly.
And just maybe it's worth mentioning one of the issues about genocide, the definition of what the genocide is this issue of intentionality. Is there intentional killing of mass civilians or targeting of mass civilians? And if you have numerous evidence, you can't just say it's genocide without showing the evidence. So the evidence is there. It's not just one organization or one author or one scholar. And it's certainly not the biased ones. It's not like the ones who, Muslim scholars or Arab scholars or so on. But all that is mentioned here is that, avoid simplistic simple narratives that fit our political preferences, and then he goes on and does exactly that. He does exactly that while projecting an image of neutrality. We see the suffering on both sides, and we talk about just responses and so on. And again, to me, this undermining of what's happening in Gaza. You're right, maybe Danny. It's now August 2025. We're talking about 1 year, 9 months into this genocide. The numbers in themselves are horrifying. The images are horrifying. And all he can say is some will, however, would question whether flattening Gaza, killing 100,000 people, God knows how many is the real number, including 20,000 children, was proportionate and strategic. Nothing about was it human, was it just, was it ethical, was it right, was it evil, and so on.
I think also, Munther, like using that language of proportionality and so on, by a Christian is super problematic to me. What is this gospel that we say we proclaim? Like, is this a gospel of peace, or is this a gospel of legal theory about warfare? if this is your talking point, and you're not referencing Matthew 5 and the call to be peacemakers and to be those who advocate for liberation and for justice according to Christ in Luke 4 and so on. So for somehow we bracket the gospel, which is ironic for someone's ministry who's based on this idea of the gospel, right? We bracket that, and now we are peddle in these political theories about proportionality and just how did the Israel extend the limits of warfare. This is not the conversation that we Christians should be having. The conversation is like, are we pursuing the narrow path of the cross? Are we being faithful to Christ? Not to discuss and to try to give legitimacy to warfare and destruction, and like we said, to genocide.
What does loving the enemy means? Does it apply to political context, or
right, yeah.
what Jesus says talking about, naive ideas when two Christians don't get along, we should love one another? I think that's a whole discussion in itself. The fact that many evangelical approaches to war in general, but in particular to what's happening in Palestine, is so far removed from the Sermon on the Mountain. Mm-hmm. And I think it's worth discussing in itself. So, the conclusion, and this is a very important conclusion because I've heard this, I've read it in different maybe words, but the same concept of fairness, both sides, and so on. He calls it call for Christian consistency. The Middle East's problem will not be solved by reducing them to hashtags or campus chants. They require patient engagement, nuanced understanding, and the kind of costly love that characterizes authentic Christian witness. Amen to that. This means speaking truthfully about Hamas's terrorism while also acknowledging Palestinian suffering. It could be suffering from diabetes. Who knows what he means by that. It means supporting Israel's right to defend itself while questioning whether all tactics serve the cause of justice. It means caring about Gaza while not forgetting those suffering in many other situations in the Middle East. It means advocating for Palestinian Christians while also defending Jewish families. The image of God is reflected in both Israeli and Palestinian faces, in both Jewish and Arab children who deserve safety and dignity. Our calling is to advocate for justice, peace, and the protection of the vulnerable, especially our persecuted brothers and sisters in Christ. Our ultimate hope is not in political solutions, but in the Prince of Peace, who will one day make all things right. Wow, a lot. So again, a lot to cover. But it's beautiful Christian language. A lot of it is things we should all say amen to. But then especially the paragraph that he sandwiched in between those two things actually maybe serves the exact opposite of what he's trying to say about serving the cause of justice and peace and costly love. So let's begin. Speaking truthfully about Hamas's terrorism while also acknowledging Palestinian suffering. So nothing about Israeli terrorism, the genocide, the evil starvation of children, the horrific starvation of children. It's evil. Say it. No, it's just Palestinian suffering. As he said, we could be suffering from the heat. I don't know. There's a heat wave right now in Palestine. And notice how, he specifically doesn't name what, because the Palestinian suffering is coming from the triangle, remember. Why are we suffering? It's the corruption of our leaders, it's extremism, and few checkpoints here and there. That's why we're suffering. So, my goodness.
Munther also, he
support Israel's right to defend itself. And yeah, let me just read this one. Israel's right to defend, but just we can question. Let's question whether all tactics, the genocide, the displacement of 2 million people, serve the cause of justice. I have a question. Do you think that killing tens of thousands, displacing 2 million and killing 20,000 children, leveling Gaza completely. Do you think that serves the cause of justice? We just question
A
that.
settler colonial state built on Palestinian blood and bones, the presupposition is that it is just and their cause, and they're working for justice. But now maybe they are using a bit of tactics that might not serve the cause of justice. This is how this sentence reads to me.
Yeah, 77 years of oppression and then the genocidal war, and then you talk about tactics. Munther, we have to address the harmful, violent language against Muslims in what you just read. I want to talk about two things. One, this language about Hamas's terrorism. Well, I mean, again, we're not justifying anything that Hamas did. A lot of war crimes were committed. It's heinous, taking hostages, killing innocents, and so on. But this kind of language of terrorism is very problematic to us in the Middle East, because we're also aware of how that language has been used to justify the destruction of societies, whether in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and also in Palestine. Right? There's this perpetual enemy, the terrorist, the savage. And Tony, you mentioned the Amalekite connection of the Gospel Coalition article before. So yeah, Hamas has the Amalekite spirit, and therefore they have to be destroyed. Of course, we know the biblical injunction for the Amalekites, which is a destruction of every child and every woman and every animal among the Amalekites, which is literally what Israel has been doing in Gaza. So you kill the Hamas member, but you're killing everyone else around that person. But there's this kind of the usage of terrorism for Hamas, which we can debate the legal political language, but use it in a way which, for someone who functions in this kind of language of the persecuted Christians, kind of uses this language conveniently to paint all Muslim militia insurgencies in the same way. So Hamas is just one other terrorist group like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, without any context. It's not like this is a liberationist movement that uses militancy to fight against occupation. This is just simple. Again, Munther, your point about the simple narrative, right? This is just terrorists who have no story to tell, no nuance, nothing. The other thing, and we as Palestinian Christians, we kind of challenge our siblings in the West to kind of challenge that language, because also, like you mentioned, Munther, like, what does it mean to love your enemy? Like, what does it mean to love the terrorist? Do you want the well-being of people who suffer? Do you want the well-being of people who put in situations where they also resort to violence, even in heinous ways like we saw? But also there's the one phrase that really triggered me is this kind of language about advocating for Jews and Christians. Let me find
It means advocating for Palestinian Christians while also defending Jewish families.
Exactly. It means, so to be a Christian person is to advocate for Palestinian Christians, the 1% of the Palestinian people, while also defending Jewish families. And it's like, okay, well, that's great. That sounds like, if I was an American reading this, like, oh, this is great. Look, but seriously, the vast majority of those killed in Gaza are Muslims. Those who are being attacked every day in the West Bank are Muslims. Do you want to advocate for them? Is it possible for a Christian, an evangelical Christian, to also advocate for people made in God's image and likeness who just happen to be Muslim, who also are suffering by Christian support to Israel? So this is for me, it's just a remarkable, it just shows so much of that anti-Muslim dehumanization and bigotry, and it's cloaked in this nice Christian language. And that's, for me, it's what disturbs me, because the language is so nice, but if you just unpack it a bit, there's so much bigotry and disregard and dehumanization. People, like Christians, we need to be very alert to this language. It's super problematic.
Can I interject here just to remind maybe our audience that, of our Christian ethic, right? Like the parable of the Good Samaritan. That guy who was unconscious, naked, he was in the Greek anthropos tis, a human being, any human being. So this is our Christian ethic. We care about the suffering of every human being, not just the suffering of our co-religionists. And reading this article, I felt Christianity is this cult of religion where just people are taking care of each other, but forgetting the suffering of the rest of the world. But this is not Christianity, at least not New Testament Christianity. So because the audience of the Gospel Coalition are very evangelical, and we need to speak about the biblical base of why we're upset at this statement that we should advocate for Palestinian Christians only and Jewish families. And perhaps what's behind this Jewish families is because they are God's chosen people. I wonder.
The article then, and it's interesting you said that, because it says it means caring about Gaza while not forgetting those suffering in many other situations. Now, this is usually another way of silencing, by the way, those who support Palestinian rights by saying, why aren't you talking about Sudan? The article makes a reference to the suffering in Syria. Both are horrific situations that deserves and merit our attentions. What I can't accept is why I, as a Palestinian, must address all the sufferings in the world before talking about the suffering of my people. I think it's simple. There's this idea that we should always put the others ahead of us as Christians. We should always seek the best interest of others rather than always fighting for our rights. I don't see Jesus pushing us to fight for our rights. Actually, he told us, you will have no rights. Everyone will be prepared if you want to follow me. Yet somehow many times I feel we make it all about ourselves. So in a sense, I would say, yes, let's care about what's happening in Syria, in Sudan, in Yemen. Definitely. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't care about what's happening in Gaza. And certainly that does not mean we should care about only what's happening to Christians. But one other thing about this paragraph that I always find fascinating, of course, again, never condemning Israel. No one condemns Israel, just questioning, but condemnation goes to the Palestinians. And it also means supporting Israel's right to defend itself. I wish to know, what would it take for American evangelicals or Western Christians in general to give us this privilege, this kind of, to defend ourselves as Palestinians? I wish to ever hear it in the media or in Christian circles. Palestinians have the right to defend themselves. And by the way, let's be clear. In the villages near Ramallah, Kufr Malik, when the Palestinians tried to defend the village from the settlers who attacked them, they killed 3 of them. Yep. They killed 3 young men. And so, what do we do to defend ourselves? Do we even have the right to defend ourselves? And to make it, again, reducing complex human suffering to simple narratives. That's what he tells us not to do. Recently, my wife, I'm not sure she'll be happy if I share this, but she was at the checkpoint. She was driving the checkpoint in which Palestinians leave Bethlehem to Ramallah. And it's the container. It's the nightmare of every Palestinian who live in the south of the West Bank. Because we wait for hours for nothing. It's not about security. We know it's about control and intimidation. Sometimes they close it, you wait for an hour, 2, 3, 4, then they open it and you just go. And at that particular time, the car in front of the car she was driving, and then the car in front of her, they stopped the car. It's a 7-passenger car. They picked one young man, took him out of the car. This was recently. Beat him up brutally in front of everyone, and then put him back in the car and told the car to pass. My wife passed next. She was horrified, literally, and then they didn't stop her and she moved on. And she came back traumatized by that experience, telling me what she saw. It makes you think of that young man who was beaten, humiliated in front of others. And I tried to put myself in his shoes, try to imagine what was he thinking. And couldn't help but think that if that young man, in a moment of qahr, we say in Arabic, anger and frustration, attack the soldier who was beating him. And the soldier would shoot him. You know, this kind of article and thinking will call that young man a terrorist.
Yeah,
100%.
Sure.
And say that the soldiers have the right to defend themselves. And this is what makes us angry as Christians. Do people understand how difficult it is to walk in our shoes?
This incident is
Or the
a
shoes of the
summary.
people of Gaza.
This incident is a summary of what happened in Gaza. Like, it's a microcosm, right?
But Tony, it's a small incident
Yes, I mean,
in comparison to 77 years of brutality, of displacement, land confiscation, oppression, the brutal, dehumanizing siege against Gaza for 17 years, 15 or 16 years before October 7th. I mean, I always say, put yourself in our shoes as Palestinians. And usually these kind of arguments come from the same people who, in their own context, will turn things upside down to defend their rights to carry weapons and shoot anyone who trespasses on their backyard. But Palestinians somehow don't have the right to defend themselves. And this kind of thinking, this article, with its beautiful Christian language and fair-mindedness and both sides, what it does is serve this Zionist narrative and continues to enable the oppression, the dehumanization of Palestinians. And for that to be in the Gospel Coalition, again, mainline evangelical, shows that the issue we're facing is far beyond end-time prophecy and dispensationalism and its pre-mill and post-mill and those connotations, or the Scofield Bible. Again, this is mainline Reformed theology that speaks the language of fairness. And maybe before I give you the chance to say final words, I think we have to conclude very soon. I can't help but comment on the last passage. Again, it's a beautiful passage. And the last sentence, I mean. And by the way, this sentence I could have said years ago. Our ultimate hope lies not in political solutions, but in the Prince of Peace who will one day make all things right. I 1000% believe that Jesus is the Prince of Peace who will one day make all things right. But my fear is that this gives the impression that we can do nothing, we should do nothing, don't engage in politics, don't talk about don't, advocate for justice for the Palestinians, don't defend the oppressed, don't seek justice, wait for Jesus to come so that he will save us. And yes, our hope does not lie in political solutions, but we should call out political solutions or structures that enable injustice. We should boycott these systems of injustice that enable injustice. We cannot just play this nice spiritual language, Jesus will come day and rescue us. Jesus showed us the way. He told us what needs to be done. He told us to challenge evil with good. He told us to love the enemy, walk the extra mile. We need to wrestle with this idea. What does it mean? And he embodied the kingdom, his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven now. Can we be ambassadors of that kingdom? To me, this is the gospel. This is what it means to submit to Jesus. Not simply waiting for him to come and save us because he already saved us, but walk in his path and wrestle and expect adversity. Because, darkness will always unavoidably reject light. And so, to me, this article is an example of many things that I find very troubling in this evangelical, and to be honest, many other mainline Christian spirituality that comes across as peaceful, loving, believing, but in the end, it actually, intentionally or not, I'm not going to judge the heart of the author or whether this is intentional or not. And I would definitely love if we can have a conversation one day. But it denies the causes of the suffering of it denies truth in its essence and does not serve the cause of justice. Do you have final words?
Yeah, I would echo that, Munther. Thanks for those last comments. And this kind of language, just to emphasize the same sentence you just highlighted, about the Prince of Peace who would make things right. I would imagine that a Christian in the US in the 50s, a white Christian, would have said the same thing about Jim Crow and segregation. It's like, yeah, it's kind of complicated. I wish we have a solution to segregation, but one day Christ would make it right. Maybe a German Christian in the 30s and 40s said the same thing about anti-Semitism. It's like, yeah, it's kind of messy. I don't know what to do with the Jewish people. They're kind of, we don't like them. But one day Christ will make things right. And it just, apartheid in South Africa. I mean, you can give any example you want. And it just strikes me that the same talking points are still used, and use this Christian beautiful language to whitewash oppression, and also wash your hands from complicity, from our own role in all of this, and how this kind of theology, this kind of rhetoric that is clearly anti-Muslim and clearly anti-Palestinian is being so normalized. And actually, I was seeing the comments on this article on Facebook, and many Christians are saying, wow, this is really balanced. Thank you for this fair assessment. And like, come on, guys. And for me, it's just really tragic. It's really tragic that stuff like this is as presented as something, fair and balanced. And obviously it's not. And it's a shame that we're still having this conversation in 2025, after like 100 years of Christian violence and complicity in genocide, in the Holocaust, in segregation and racism. And once again, the Palestinian now is the new person to dehumanize. What was a Jewish person, it was a black person, now it's the Palestinian. And it's super tragic, super sad.
Munther, just picking up on something that you mentioned in your final words, we would love to connect with the author. And I think it is worth highlighting that when it comes especially to Christianity Today and the Gospel Coalition, we have been connecting. We have tried to reach out, for example, in the case of Christianity Today, a very well-known evangelical leader tried to connect us, but with no response. I connected, I'm actually friends with someone who works at the Gospel Coalition, the Arabic edition, and he texted me at the beginning of the genocidal war on Gaza to express his compassion and his empathy. And I told him, please, let's do something. And he never came back to me. So we have been reaching out, but no one wants to engage with us. And that's why we are choosing this means. Because this is dangerous stuff that is written here. And it is shocking that it's coming from a Christian, because Christians are called to be the salt and light of the world. And I interpret that as being the moral compass of the world, telling people what is right and what is wrong. This is the mission of the disciple of Jesus. And here we see the complete opposite, an article that echoes the politicians of the world. I mean, there's no difference. He didn't add to our understanding anything. I would have tuned into any secular analysis or any article, Fox News or the same thing. He did not add anything to me. And this is the Gospel Coalition. Highly problematic, very sad, heartbreaking that followers of Jesus would write such pieces and publish them.
And just to say in the end, thank you for listening, that this is not to single out one article or one author. I think I find this one to be very representative of similar, if not copied, arguments that we've heard before the war and throughout this war. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Christ at the Checkpoint podcast, and until we meet again.